Okay, we're good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another session of Let's Discuss on Facebook on the Findmypast Facebook page. We're incredibly happy to have you with us today, and we hope that everybody is doing okay. It's been a pretty crazy week, and that's putting it mildly, I think. My name is Jen Baldwin. I am the Data Acquisition Manager for North America for Findmypast. And we're happy to do these sessions and hopefully keep everybody kind of engaged in their family history and thinking about new and creative ways to research and enjoying each other's company and reaching out to the community while we're all kind of in this lockdown situation. I'm running out of ways to say that. So I'm going to wait for a couple people to indicate that we're live and you're seeing me and you can hear me okay and everything is working. I see a few people kind of getting online, so that's wonderful. Please leave comments. We'd love to know who you are, where you're from, where you're joining us from, and what your interests are. And particularly this week, I really want to hear from a lot of you. I'm hoping that a lot of people will have comments today. So we've been doing these sessions now for a few weeks. And again, I'm broadcasting from the United States, so a pretty mixed audience. And for those of you who have joined me for the last few weeks, you'll notice that the background is different. I'm not in my usual space. I'm actually at my parents' house. We're celebrating my dad's 80th birthday in a very safe way. Lots of social distancing, lots of outside time. But we were able to get a little bit of our family together and be with him for his 80th birthday. So pretty big day, actually. And that's today. So everybody say happy birthday to my dad, who's not on Facebook, right? All right. So we've got people saying hi. Thank you. Alona Tester. Hello from Australia. You're watching. Rose says hi. William's with us. Thank you, William. Deborah from Surrey. Penny is watching, it looks like. We've got Arlington, Texas. Is Lisa. Kim says hi. Brenda says, can you please maybe find my past? Well, Brenda, we can maybe work on that together. It's a fun hobby. Let's get into it. Rita's watching, Fiona's watching, Lavina from Augusta, Georgia. Thank you for being with us, Lavina. Fiona from South Wales. Oh, fantastic. I don't think I know anybody from South Wales, actually. So it's very nice to meet you. Oh, Jackie says, happy birthday, Dad. Thank you. And Deborah, I really appreciate that. And I know he will too. It's quite a year. It's been quite a year for our family. So it's a big birthday. Alan from Massachusetts. All right, all sorts of people. Ivy, thank you for saying happy birthday. Patricia or Pat from Cyprus, fantastic. Okay, so today's format is going to be a little bit different. I know some of you have been with me before, and we've done all sorts of things. We've had big discussions, and we've had kind of a couple of how-to sessions, and we've definitely had guests, which have been really, really interesting conversations. But today we're going to do something totally different. Today we're going to talk about crowdsourcing. And I wanted to actually do that by asking all of you to help me crowdsource one of my ongoing research projects. Yay! And of course that, there's a couple of objectives here, one of which is to kind of demonstrate how you might crowdsource something, how you might actually reach out in a virtual world like this and ask people for help. But also, I'll be honest, right? There is a lot about English research that I don't know, right? My expertise is in North America. And so I consider myself a beginner to kind of beginner intermediate English researcher. And this particular research problem is centered in Birmingham, England. And so I need some help, right? I can't know everything. I don't know everything. I never will. And I certainly believe that every single person has something to teach every other single person, right? We're all just one big family. The human family is incredible, and we put our brains together, we do amazing things. And so I really wanted to showcase a little bit of how you might make this work in kind of this virtual space. And especially for those involved in societies or family history organizations, this may be something that you can take on the local level and just kind of explode, right? And bring an international flavor to. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and we're going to kind of walk through, oops, I got to hit the right button. We're going to walk through a little bit of my research and how I kind of envision this happening. Now, I may be wrong, right? This may not work at all. It is a bit of an experiment, but hopefully what we work on today throughout the hour, and as we work, as we talk through this, will actually give you an idea of what you might be able to do. I'm just waiting for my, oh gosh, my PowerPoint is a spinning wheel. Do you guys see that? No, you can't see it. All right, we're just gonna let PowerPoint think for a second. Oh, I hope this works. This would be the first, I tested it a few minutes ago, it was fine. I can start talking even though it looks a little weird, I hope. So today we're gonna talk about my Birmingham ancestors. And again, the reason I chose this particular kind of case study or project is because I am kind of just getting started in this work, and I need some help, but also because I think it's a great example of all the different facets of things that you could talk about. Oh, great. Thank you, William. He says we can see the first page, so it seems to be fine. That's perfect. Okay, good. So there's all sorts of ways that you could do this. There's all sorts of ways that you might approach this concept of kind of crowdsourcing, but I wanted to use something that I felt like could be shared by a variety of people, right? So just because we're specifically talking about a Birmingham case doesn't mean that the research that we're going to talk about today doesn't apply to the rest of the country, right? There's certainly other areas of the country that we could do this. Okay, let me just try this again because PowerPoint is not responding at all, which is a little bit of a difficulty, right? But I can kind of, let me just see what we've got going here. So bear with me. This is what always happens with live demonstrations, right? Yeah, of course. So let me just get PowerPoint cooperating. Now, so I will give away a few of my slides as I try and fix my technical issues here. So really what this story is an old family legend, right? It's an oral history that's been passed down for a number of years. So the story centers around John Horatio Lawrence and his wife, Sarah Evans. And John is thought to be, because of oral histories that have been shared, John is thought to be a direct immigrant from the Birmingham area. And we think he was born around Birmingham. That's what the documents actually say, is probably around Birmingham, England. And that's kind of a big territory, right? So there's a whole lot of research opportunity. And the story goes on to talk about, it gives a couple of details about his father. It talks about how he was in the British Army. It has a potential in which he talks about, or they talk about that he had an apprenticeship as a shoemaker, but then another version says that he was never a shoemaker. He was never an apprentice. So there's all sorts of things going on here. So the big questions are going to be centered around those oral histories, right? And what I'm trying to do is say, you know, are the oral histories true, right? Are any facet of the oral histories true? There we go. That's much better. Okay, so let's dig into this, right? So that's kind of the intro to John's story, but let's back up a step and talk about what I think this is going to look like. So my plan today is to kind of just give you a summary of that research project, that research that I've been doing, and how much I've done so far. And then I would love to hear from all of you. What did I miss? What should I do next? Where are the logical things that I'm not looking, right? What would you, if you were in Birmingham, or if you know intimately about that area's history, what might I not know as a native of the United States about that area, and what's important about research in that area, right? And I can buy books and I can read, but I would love to hear from the people that are actually in it every day, right? So my research questions, I have three basic research questions that I'm trying to attempt to answer right now. First, who are the parents of John Horatio Lawrence? What elements of this family oral legend are most likely to be true? And then, did John actually serve with the British Army? Because I can't definitively say yet, yes or no, that actually happened. So how is this going to work today for us? So I'm going to present to you just a few highlights that I've chosen that I think will be really good discussion points. There's certainly much more to the story, and there's much more research that I've done behind the scenes that I'm not going to have time to share with you. And that's just common sense, right? I mean, we only have an hour together. But as we work through the material, I would love to see you just post questions, comments, ideas, any suggestions, anything that you have that that just pops into your brain. And remember that everybody knows something of value, so no comment is insignificant, right? I will take all of those comments and consider them carefully. I would love to see you all talking to each other in the comments, expand on ideas, right? Maybe somebody says you need to look at, record set A, and then somebody else says, oh, don't forget folder B that's in that record set because it's really important to that proof concept that you're trying to get through. And of course, that underlying goal that we all have something to learn from each other and apply to a research. Again, whether you have Birmingham ancestry or not, really is kind of irrelevant, right? Today's objective is thinking about how to crowdsource, but also thinking about kind of English research, right? What do you know that I don't know and someone else might not know? I think this could be an outstanding learning tool, and I think it gets better every time you make a comment or leave a question. So that's what my dream is, and we'll see if it actually can happen. So let's talk about John. This is John Horatio Lawrence, and this is kind of my synopsis shot of him, right? Nice big beard, right? Right, very kind of typical, looking for his time. But we believe he was born between 1804 and 1806, again around Birmingham, England. His father was a silversmith of the English middle class. The oral history tells us that he served in the English army, including some time spent in India. And then he immigrates to North America around 1830 through Canada. And I actually know that. I have found his immigration. So I know that that date is accurate. And he settled likely in Livingston County in kind of central mid New York, where he meets and marries Sarah Evans, who is of Welsh descent and is adopted. She was orphaned as a child and adopted by this wealthy family. And then they go on to have a pretty typical North American experience, right? They have children born in Springfield, Pennsylvania, and then across Ohio. He dies in 1880 in Nebraska, living with one of his daughters. And their route from New York into Pennsylvania to Ohio is just very typical kind of overland migration route for the US. So again, but how do we know what we know? Well, or what we think we know, right? And the answer to that I've already told you is these family legends that have been passed down. So beyond the documents that I have in my possession, and all three of these are part of the family archive that is at my house, and other similar versions of this, I have connected with several descendants of John and Sarah through either just knowing each other through, being cousins, or through DNA. And every time I have said, I'm looking for information on John and Sarah, what do you know? And they tell me, oh, I have this lovely written oral history. I'll just send you a copy and you'll know everything about John and Sarah. I've never researched them because I know it all. It's in this oral history that's been passed down. Well, every single one of these oral histories looks a lot like this, right? They're almost all completely identical. So it's very interesting to compare. Like there's a couple of pieces that are different, right? Like one says he was an apprenticeship, but most of them don't. They all talk about how he traveled back to England in 1840 to deal with the death of a parent, but half of them say it was his dad and half of them say it was his mom. And my theory is that if he traveled all the way back, it was probably his father, because there would have been some kind of an estate or an inheritance or something that he had to deal with. I don't know. It's just a theory, right? So if we take all of these and we center on my questions of the day, right? Who are his parents? Did he serve in the army? And how much of this is really true? We're not going to answer all of that in an hour. But let's take a look and kind of give you a snapshot of John's life. And I'm just going to quickly roll through this because it's a lot, right? There's a lot of information here. And this is one of my points I want to make actually about crowdsourcing. Now, I started crowdsourcing my research problems and my desire to learn more several years ago on Twitter, actually. I was part of a group of people who created Gen Chat, which is a Twitter chat about genealogy. It's very similar to Ancestry Hour. Wonderful, wonderful platform for sharing information and asking questions of other genealogists on Twitter. So one of the things that I learned right away about crowdsourcing was that you can't give too much right up front, right? It's overwhelming. So this is my example slide of how not to do things, right? This is pretty overwhelming. It talks about John's father, how, again, he was a silversmith. The uncle was thought to have been knighted on account of his achievements as an artist. But we don't know the uncle's name, and it's just something that gets passed down because it sounds good, right? Oh, John Lawrence's uncle was a knight. Like, that's something that gets involved in family legend, right? And how much of it is a kernel of truth, and how much of it is actually researchable, is that a word? Something we can research, right? So John is thought to have had a sister. Anne King is how she's identified. She was approximately 10 years older than John, and she is the only other sibling to survive, according to the family legend. Out of 10 siblings, Anne and John are the only ones who survived to adulthood. Again, John's born around 1806, probably in Birmingham. And then we go through his timeline. He ends up in New York. After immigration into Canada. We have a little bit of information in there about Sarah, but you're looking at a lot of context, right? So I took this slide and I went, yeah, that's too much to make the point. Don't overshare when you're trying to crowdsource. And bring it down to something a little bit more reasonable, right? So all of these documents combined kind of give us this snapshot view, because again, these are the questions that I'm really focused on, right? We know enlistment in the British military, for example, was a period of 7 years or 21 years. And I put big red question marks around his time with the British Army because I can't prove it. And that's one of my biggest questions. And I put a big red question mark next to that 7-year apprenticeship as a shoemaker because, again, I can't prove it, right? There's nothing yet that I have identified that says firmly that there even was that opportunity for him wherever he was, around Birmingham. We know that around the time period that he arrived in Canada, the British Army had a pension scheme that allowed people to take cash and land in Canada versus a full-time pension. And so it's theoretically possible that he did do a short stint in the Army and then pensioned out via this land scheme in Canada. And that's how he ends up in North America. The story also tells us that after he arrived in Canada, he got mixed into some kind of business deal with some unknown man. He got swindled out of all of his money, and he chased him kind of all over Canada and New York, and that's how he ends up in New York to meet his bride, right? So when you're talking about crowdsourcing, when you're talking about sharing information, this is more along the lines of a snapshot, a tidbit of content, a little bit of information to kind of get you into the discussion, so that people can actually engage, right? Okay, so let me take a look here for really quick, actually, at some comments, just to see what people are coming up with so far. Oh, it looks like all sorts of regional references, which I'm enjoying. I might have to. Oh, you guys are, yeah. All right. So Deborah commented on pronunciation of Birmingham. Did I get it right, Deborah? So I'm going to be honest. My colleague and I, Miko, talked about my pronunciation of English place names last week, and I find it one of the most difficult things I've ever tried to do. Like, I'm just going to be really, really transparent. There are some places in England that I do not even try to pronounce. And the reason I call it Birmingham so much is because my mom's side of the family is from Birmingham, Alabama. And it's really hard for me to remember to say it 2 different ways. So I might just say England from now on. I get called out on it once in a while, and I'm not British, and I don't spend enough time in England to really get it down. So I really need to try to do that. Okay, so all right. Hopefully you guys will forgive me if you are in the UK. Oh, Rosie says there would definitely be shoemaker apprentices in that area in pretty much all cities. So that's good to know. And the National Archives for Army Record. Yeah, absolutely, Karen. If you can, I have found a couple of things, and I'll show you, Karen, a couple of entries that I've identified. I just don't have any way to confirm that it's actually him or not. Okay, so that's a great segue actually into what I've already done. Let's take a look at some of the highlights. My research today, I've actually been researching this family for a little while now. And I've done I've really spent quite a bit of time on baptismal records because I feel like that's going to be really crucial, right? If I can find him in baptismal registers, then I have a much more accurate place to start. So I have examined baptismal records for John himself within a 10-mile radius of Birmingham. And I have found that it's inconclusive. I can't find a solid match, and I can't find a family, and that's the next bullet point on the slide, that includes kind of multiple kids over a 10-year span, including a John and an Anne, or any variation of those names. So I'm still analyzing and I'm still working through those spreadsheets, but for now, at least, parish registers have given me some research opportunity, but nothing definitive. I also looked at parish burials for any adult Lawrence in that area being buried between 1839 and 1841. And so far that is inconclusive as well. And when I say inconclusive, I mean that I'm not finding a standalone burial that works and fits a story, but I'm also not finding one that matches any of the other people who are listed as having children, right? So, and I realize they could be from another parish, but I'm trying to use, I mean, Birmingham's makes sense, right? For a silversmith. If you're going to be in that area of the country, that seems to be the reasonable place to be in terms of from an economical standpoint, right? I have also looked at directories and other various resources like that in that city between 1770 and 1840 with a surname of Lawrence. So I'm looking for essentially anybody who's a silversmith with the last name Lawrence, and I have found someone. So I'll show you that in a minute. I've also examined British Army records for any John Lawrence born within a 5-year period of 1806, and that, as I've mentioned, has been relatively inconclusive. And then I'm doing ongoing detailed research into all 10 of the children of John and Sarah to see if I can go back a generation with any potential information that they might have. And yes, Beverly mentions that the area is also close to 2 other counties. And that is why I've been using the radius tool on Findmypast to search baptismal records and searching mileage versus counties. I have done that on other sites, but the radius tool on Findmypast I'm finding really useful because I'm able to search parish registers from a variety of locations, no matter what county it's in, right? I have learned to absolutely love that. William says, where are they buried in Birmingham? I'm practicing. Could it be another place? For example, on Birmingham Road or another town city? And it could, William. And that's just the thing, right? I don't know anything about that death, that 1840 death, except for the fact that John traveled from the US back to England to deal with something. And then the only reason I think it was remarkable is because the story is that on the journey home back to America, he was robbed and he came back completely penniless. He had nothing left in his pockets when he got back from that. And so it was significant because his parent died, but also because he was robbed on the way home and he didn't have any money. Okay, so let's look at those parish registers. I did spend, like I said, some, kind of that initial examination of parish registers, and I found kind of 2 clusters-ish, right? There's the Birmingham cluster that's very clearly like in the city, or what we define today as a city. And then there's kind of this more, Coventry area and east a little bit, that's a little bit more rural. So because of that, and because none of them were conclusive, I really have decided to move the research a little bit more west into that Black Country region. I feel like a silversmith would be more likely to reside and work there. Versus being more rural. So I don't really have any evidence to base that off of. It's just a hunch. Okay. If we look at the idea that he was in the British Army, right? Well, as I mentioned, I've found a few entries in various record sets, but again, nothing's conclusive. Nothing I can find that definitively says this is the guy, right? There's the records are pretty thin on these, for example. So like the British Army Service Records piece from the 44th Foot, our military expert, Paul Nixon, has told me that's the most likely regiment he would have served with. But he was 48 years old when he was pensioned out in 1834. So while the time frame seems to be right, the age is completely off, right? So it's elements like that I can't seem to just pinpoint the right one. So the one success that I have had is his dad. I have identified a John Lawrence who appears to be the only silversmith in the area with the last name of Lawrence during the period that we're talking about, 1820s, 1830s. I cannot find anything else that indicates any other silversmith with that surname. And I have a variety of records, right? I have directories. I have this, a handful of these examples of his stamp as a silversmith. He filed a patent that essentially equates to being a seatbelt for a horse saddle, and this piece kind of connects underneath the belly of the horse, which I find really fascinating. So I really hope that this is my guy, right? It'd be like my fifth great grandfather, so I think it's my guy. But that means also that I have bias, right? I have confirmation bias, and I need someone to point out to me if it's not. I have found criminal records. So this record is actually from 1804. This is the earliest one that I found, where he is actually involved in this case as a victim of theft by his apprentice, who eventually is recommended a mercy sentence. But he is, John Lawrence, the silversmith, is quoted in the documentation. There's a wonderful collection that I just absolutely love from the National Archives. Gave me a lot of insight, potentially some fan research, right? Friends, associates, neighbors. Maybe there's some people involved in this case that I could really dig into. And this is one of two criminal examples that I found where John is supposedly a victim of a theft. And there's another one that's reported on in newspapers pretty heavily about 15 or 20 years after this. Now, I also know that in the city of Birmingham archives, there are two records in particular that I need to acquire, but I have not been able to yet because they've been closed because of the lockdown. So I did have some email communication with one of their archivists right before RootsTech, so early this year, and they confirmed these are the only two records they have that they can definitively find that talk about John Lawrence, a silversmith. And so I need to get copies of these, but again, access right now is not available. So eventually these will be acquired. And then let's turn to this idea of traveling back for a death, right? Maybe if John's father was really John, then John Sr., if his death was in 1840, these are the most likely candidates. I feel like the first one, the 28 January 1840, in Helmden is probably the most likely candidate for his burial. But again, it's all kind of just, it's almost process of elimination, right, at this point. So don't really know for sure. And don't you like that map? My 11-year-old daughter helped me make that map, and I was really excited about that. Okay, so that's kind of the snapshot of the research. Let me go ahead and put that table back up. And I'm just going to let this sit for a few minutes so that people can discuss. And we'll go through some of the comments. Now, Deborah says, the middle name of Horatio is interesting, probably in tribute to Admiral Horatio Nelson. Yes, I absolutely agree. Very prominent at this time. And of course, he died in October 1805. So it's possible that was what triggered John's parents giving him the name. And that would point to a baptism after that date. That's a good point. I totally recognize that Admiral Nelson was probably the inspiration for him being named that way. I hadn't thought about correlating that with the death of his date. So that's very interesting, Deborah. Thanks for that suggestion. Okay, so Janet says, my great-grandfather was a silversmith. Most of these were central Birmingham in the area, then listed as Handsworth, listed in Warwickshire, not really rural. Okay, so that seems to be confirming the idea that perhaps he's more towards the city. Patricia says, look for a will. Yeah. Okay. So I have, and again, there's a whole lot of research behind this that I chose not to share because it would just simply take too much time. I have looked through indexes and calendars of wills, but again, nothing definitive. I wish I could find one because that would really help me, I think. The spelling variations of Lawrence are interesting from Linda. Yeah, totally agree, Linda. And I have found that using wildcards searching on all the various websites, as well as just searching for different spellings, just, point blank, so in this example, I've spelled it L-A-W-R-E-N-C-E every time, but I use wildcards a lot. And I also just type in L-A-U-R-E-N-C-E or, whatever variation I'm looking for. I've started to compile a full list of, or as many variations of Lawrence that I can. So that's been very, very interesting to look at as well. And there are different spellings across the records that I've accumulated so far. Okay, let's see. Different spellings. So Penny suggested different spellings of Lawrence as well. Karen says, have you looked on Society of Genealogists catalog? I have, but admittedly not to the extent I probably need to. Again, this is ongoing research, but they are a fantastic resource and certainly something that should be considered really for research across England. So that is definitely an opportunity for me, and I recognize that. But again, just not something that I've been able to really spend a ton of time with yet. I will say yet, right? Okay. What else? Let's see. I am just scrolling through comments. So, oh, Deborah says it's okay on the pronunciation. We're used to the difficulty Americans have with British place names, and lots of them aren't obvious at all. That's so true. Like, it's really, really tricky for me. But at the same time, I grew up in an area in Washington State that had a lot of Native American place names, and so, I think it's a fair trade. Actually, I would love to see some of my. Oh, I shouldn't say this. I should love to see some of my Find My Past colleagues trying to say things like squim and piala Benenumcla, and it just rolls off the tongue, right? Just like it does in Britain, or so that's funny. Okay. But I do appreciate you forgiving me for butchering all of your place names. All right, so let's see. William says there is a Sir H. Lawrence showing in newspapers in 1889 Birmingham. So 1889 would be pretty dang late. If his uncle was knighted, he probably would have been born in the 1700s sometime, just guessing. Now, I did find a Thomas Lawrence who was knighted as an artist, but he appears to be, I mean, he was the famous Thomas Lawrence artist, right? He was a painter, and he painted portraits of, essentially everybody. If you were anybody in London or in England across that time, you were painted by Thomas Lawrence. But from what I've seen, he didn't have any kids, he didn't have any descendants. So his family profile doesn't match my Lawrence's, and so I don't think that's the right guy. However, but it was the right time frame, and I do think that it's possible that someone just went, oh, Thomas Lawrence, they must have been a relative, he was famous, I'm going to make myself famous by saying that that's my uncle, right? Because of course, when these stories originated, there's no way to prove either way. So I kind of question the idea of the uncle being knighted because of that celebrity figure at the time. I don't know. It's it should be. Oh, Ellie says I definitely couldn't say that. Ellie, thanks for watching. That's sweet of you. It's late there. And that's funny. She's like, I couldn't say that. Yeah, you're right. I can't say Birmingham, apparently. You know what? Maybe someone said something about Alex. It sounds like a challenge. Find my past pronunciation challenge. That could be really fun, right? Who can stump each other? That would be pretty cute. Okay, Sir Herbert Lawrence, born 1861, was a lieutenant general, excuse me. Could be that one. I'll take a look at the link that you shared on that, William. That should be interesting to look at. But again, I think, if it was an uncle that was knighted, it had to have been earlier, right? Because if John was born in 1806, and his dad had to be probably at least 20, assuming he, 20 to have a baby, give or take. I know that's not biologically the necessity, but just reasonably thinking, if he'd already had 9 other kids, his father is at least 30, 35, 40 by the time John comes around. And so then the uncle would have had to have been born, about that same time too. So it would have also been around 35, 40, 45 years old ish, depending on the timeline. So, oh yeah, you're right. Herbert could have been a cousin. I didn't actually think about the idea of collateral relationships with cousins and that kind of thing. And you're right. The person who was knighted could have been his maternal uncle. And I'll have to go back. That's a good comment. Who said that? Patricia. Thank you, Patricia. I'll have to go back into the actual documents and see if it says anything about which side of the family the uncle was on. Now, the other interesting component that we kind of skipped over was his sister. And let me pull that slide back up so you guys can see the dates. This is really good. This is going well. I'm happy. So the sister, Anne Lawrence King, Anne King is how she's referred to in the document, born based on my math about 1796. There's no written birth date. And is the only surviving sibling of John. Now, it's what I find interesting actually is that John's birth date is written exactly precisely in all of these versions of the story. Every version says 2nd January 1806, but the sister's birth date is not known. Sarah, his wife, her birth date is listed specifically 7th August 1816 every single time in these family stories that are passed down, but nothing else comes across with that kind of consistency. And I just wonder why those two birth dates are so set in stone. And it actually makes me think that there was a family Bible somewhere and I just haven't found it yet. And I hope it survived, but that's just a hunch, right? I feel like very specific birth dates like that are probably sitting in a family Bible somewhere. Deborah says, I've had the same issue about the supposed famous relative. One of our family names in Byron, and the family legend, is Byron. And the family legend is that we're descended from the poet Lord Byron, despite the fact that he had no male children. The research shows the legend is nonsense, but it still swirls around the family. You know what? That's true. And my husband even has this, right? My husband's family has always said that they're related to this author down in the southern states of the United States. But when I started looking at her, she descends very clearly from this, this line of the family that we just have no connection to whatsoever. And I was like, yeah, just a famous thing, throw people off. Okay, so Lisa says, we have quite a few generations that overlap because of remarriages of parent who started a family with much younger second wife. In these cases, there are some uncles and aunts of the same age as a nephew niece. That's true, Lisa. And I guess I feel like I've kind of avoided some of those theories and some of those research complications because I just feel like I don't know enough yet about the basics to even begin. I mean, if you just let your imagination go, you could come up with so many different scenarios. Like, how do you know which one to chase, right? And so in this case, I think I've kind of avoided that because I could go down a rabbit hole for days and days and months and months and months, but I don't know enough of the basics, right? The other thing about Anne, I was going to go back to, Anne King, the sister, is named as Anne King, but that doesn't mean that that's her married name. It could, or her first married name, right? It could be that she had a different father. It could be that she was, Anne Lawrence originally, maybe, but maybe King is her second or third spouse. And that's just how she was remembered by the people who actually wrote the family story at the time that they wrote it, right? Maybe that's how she was known then, but maybe she had several name variations leading up to that time. I have looked into her again a little bit just to see if I can find any Anne Lawrence's marrying unknown king, about the right time frame. And there are a couple of examples, but not very many. And that's English, across the country. I didn't limit that search regionally. I just went across England. How many Anne Lawrences married an unknown king in this time frame? And there's a few, but nothing definitive. Okay. Deborah says, are there gravestones for John and Sarah which show their birth dates? Of course, depending on when the family legends were written, the precise dates may have been taken from the stones. So there are headstones for both John and Sarah, but no, neither one of them show dates. John is buried in Nebraska. He was living with one of his daughters when he died. And in fact, they were separated at that time. They were living separately. They never divorced, but they were living separately. So he's married next to his daughter, and no, I'm sorry, he's married next to his son-in-law. And it just simply says John H. Lawrence, father, and nothing else. Sarah is married in Colorado, actually not far from where I live, because she was living with one of her sons when she died. And her stone just says Sarah E. Lawrence, and mother. And actually, her stone was missing for quite a long time. When I went and sought out her burial plot, right, like where I thought she was buried, the family plot is there, and there's several members of the family sitting, in this row, and there's a big gap in the middle. And so a few years ago, my family actually kind of tracked down the stone. It was sitting in the cemetery kind of storage unit. They knew that it belonged somewhere in the cemetery, but it had somehow gotten away from the burial location, and they had just put it in storage, essentially saying maybe someday we'll be able to put this back, but they didn't know where it belonged. And so I went and I said, well, here's all my evidence. It's got to be this plot that's unmarked. And so they put it there. So it most likely is Sarah, but really that in reality, we may not ever know if that's actually where she's buried. Interesting stories around these guys. And then Deborah also says, do John and Sarah's death certificates give their birth dates? No, they don't. They give a general, I think John says 1806 in England, and Sarah's I have been unable to locate. Remember that Sarah was, theoretically at least, was orphaned as a child. So her story is that she comes from a Welsh background, that her father was a Welsh Methodist minister who came to New York, bought land really cheap. It was essentially on foreclosure. The guy who had owned it before, had owned the farm property before him, lost it to the bank, swore up and down that he would kill whoever bought his farm, and he would, get the money and pay and buy his farm again. And my ancestor didn't know that. And so he bought the farm really cheap, and he was out in his fields one day and he was shot in the back by this man. I can find no evidence of this actually happening. I've been looking for a couple of years. So that's another big question mark on this one. But Sarah and her siblings end up orphaned. The mother also dies within a short period of time, and the kids all get distributed out to various families in the area. Sarah ends up with a couple known only as the Kaisers of Kaiserville, New York, who are wealthy. They run the post office, they have a farm, they have a shoemaking company, and she is raised by them. She's their only child. They're unable to have their own kids, so they treat her as their own. They give her a great education, a horse, all these things. She's well educated in Bible studies, and she can quote Shakespeare. And she actually was a really smart woman. She was a newspaper editor, and she wrote for several newspapers over the course of her lifetime. But in the meantime, I cannot find any evidence of her birth. I don't know if she was born in New York. I don't know if she was born in Wales. I don't know if the whole Welsh story is even true. The Kaisers are nearly impossible to research as well. They don't seem to pop up anywhere. There was a Kaiserville, New York. It was a very tiny little kind of like road stop inn. And it meets the time frame and it meets the location. So I think that was them, but it wasn't a community. Like Kaiserville kind of implies that it was at least a town of some kind. And if I'm right about that, it really wasn't anything significant. All right, so let's see what else the comments are. Deborah's got all sorts of comments in here. Thank you, Deborah, so much. What else? I'm trying to scroll through, so just give me a second. If you guys are thinking about any, oh, someone just commented, Evans is a Welsh surname. Yes, absolutely, Patricia, it is. And that assumes that the oral history was true and that her surname was actually Evans. Her headstone and two other pieces of documentation, I think, do say Sarah E. Evans, but I don't know if Sarah E. Lawrence, excuse me, but I don't know if the E was for Evans or if it's a middle name, right? Like could be Elizabeth, for example. Pretty common at that point. Okay, so I think what I would love to do is, if we have anybody who has thoughts about the military question, that would be great to talk about a little bit as well. Oh, William says a lot of Evans come from Dorset too. Evans and Kings marrying in Dorset. Oh, that's okay, from Dorset. So that's another opportunity for me to look. That's good. Okay, I think, if I have not hit your question or your comment yet, forgive me. I am trying to scroll through and catch everything that I can. Lots of people, oh, still some people saying happy birthday to my dad. That's so nice. Thank you very much. Oh, and Alta from South Africa. See, I went back up to the top of the list to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, fantastic. So if anybody has Military suggestions. That would be really, really cool. Oh, Janet, you hit on something just now that I really wanted to mention. I've just started to learn about. So she says, Birmingham has a, did I say it right? Birmingham has a very distinct area close to the city center we now call the Jewelry Quarter. Almost exclusively silversmiths, polishers, etc., worked here as the center of Birmingham silverwork industries. So I was able to find a document, and I'm sorry I don't have it directly in front of me, that does talk about the Jewelry Quarter, but I think it's a little earlier than what I'm looking for. And in that text, they didn't include silversmithing. They talked about all sorts of other types of metalworks. And I want to, if I remember right, it was a publication that really focused on pre-industrial revolution and what it was before the Industrial Revolution. And so I'm glad that you said that, Janet, because I was starting to question this idea that silversmiths would have been in the Jewelry Quarter. Now, again, I'm just starting to learn about that angle of the history of this community. So if you have any resources for that, I would love to learn about those. And even if it's, you know, like a museum or something, I can always go into the museum website and read through their documentation just to see if I, you know, possibly can get a hint or something. So that would be really, really helpful. So thank you, Janet, for saying that, because I was kind of curious about that. I actually just started reading about it a few days ago, and I haven't really dug in much to know if my hunch was right or not. Okay, so as comments continue to come in, which I appreciate, thank you, I wanted to talk also not just about this research project, but also about the idea of crowdsourcing. Now, this is something obviously that Findmypast is really passionate about. We have been kind of really thinking about our community a lot over the last several months. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why we started these sessions, right? Was so that we could engage with the community, engage with family historians kind of all over the world in a different way. So a couple of things over my experience using social media for the last several years, I have just kind of found there's a couple of things to really keep in mind when you're trying to crowdsource a research project. And the first thing I would say is, right, snapshot your question as concisely as you can, but don't be afraid to give information, right? Don't give this overwhelming story, right? You notice that I never shared the picture of the full oral history with you. I gave a couple examples, but I didn't spend any time on it because it's too much to try and ask someone to read, right? So formulate a question, a very specific question, and post that to the Findmypast forum on Facebook or to one of the genealogy chats on Twitter or something. But then you have to also pay attention to it, right? Don't post it and expect someone to answer your question. Post it and have a conversation about it. You know, whatever that question you're trying to answer is, or that bit of research you're trying to get past, that brick wall you're trying to overcome. It's not about someone handing it to you, right, on the silver platter. It's about the joy of sharing knowledge with each other, right? I've gone on the Findmypast forum and answered a bunch of questions about the US because that's my strength. And quite certainly genealogy is a passion. And so I love helping other people learn about my territory. But again, I've put myself out here, you know, in this format today so that you guys can help teach me about your territory, right? For a lot of our audience obviously is in the UK, and I would love to know more about this area, especially if my ancestors really did come from Birmingham. I'm getting better at that. So it's a great way to learn, to help guide your research, to come up with new ideas. And I would even suggest that even now, right, during this lockdown time, work with your local society or work with someone on, you know, friends that you've made on Facebook through these forums and these groups, and come together on a Zoom call or a Google Hangout or whatever, and, you know, hash it all together. I used to have a couple of friends who lived near me, and we would just come in and we'd, you know, have a cup of coffee together, and we just lay out one of our research problems and say, what did I miss, right? Pick holes in this so that we can help each other learn and grow as genealogists. So it's important to share that information. It's important to, at least to me, to be able to crowdsource that kind of thing, that kind of question. But also keep in mind that there's a fine balance between too much and too little. And I know we have some people on these sessions that help us administer the Findmypast forum, and they would probably give much better advice than I do, but definitely ask, right? Find out what the best practice is for that particular group or that particular page and how you can get your questions answered. Okay, let's see. Apparently Robert asked a question and I was talking, or Robert said something. So I didn't mean to ignore you, Robert. I'm sorry. Ellie tagged it and said, okay, let me go back. Let me scroll and see if I can find what Robert's comment was. Robert said, my great-grandfather was in the Boer War, First World War and Second World War. Robert, if you want to give a little bit more information, that would be fantastic. We'd be happy to address that comment, but we'd be happy to address that. But I'll preface this again by saying that really I'm really not a British military expert. We do have a British military expert at Findmypast, and I'm sure that he would love to assist you, and so would the community. So certainly feel free to join the Findmypast forum and ask your questions there as well as here. There are lots of people out in the community that would be delighted to help you. Okay, let's see so Amanda says, in the 1960s and 70s, I used to go to Birmingham to the silversmiths in the jewelry quarter to spend birthday money. Had its own assay mark for silver, which indicates it was an important center for such work. Yeah, so the assay I think is really interesting, and I've started to learn just a little bit about that as well, but not as much as I probably should. Denny says, oh, there's more about the jewelry quarter, so that's cool. So the jewelry quarter where silversmiths would have worked is to the west of the center of Birmingham. So looking out more towards the Smethwick and Dudley area, oh, I hope I didn't butcher that, would make sense to me, especially as the address for one of the documents you have is slap in the middle of the jewelry quarter. Interesting. Okay, very good. So I think I feel like I need a map of the jewelry quarter so I can understand this a little bit better. So I'll have to look for that. Denny also commented about the potential knight. Oops, I lost the comment. Oh, sorry, it played with me a little bit. Here we go. The Knights of England, a complete record from the earliest time to the present day of the knights of all the orders of chivalry in England, Scotland, and Ireland. Oh, this is a book. Oh, okay, I gotcha. And it's online. Thank you very much for the link to that, Devin. I appreciate it. Seems to be searchable. Several Lawrence references. That's great. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Okay. And let's see. Rosie says, the comments move so fast, it's easy to miss when you have to talk and read at the same time. Yeah, it is. And okay, let's see. Karen, British newspaper, John Lawrence Silversmith, Birmingham Evidence and Insolvency Case, 1828. Yes, Karen. That is, there's that one. And then there's also I mentioned briefly the second theft incident that potentially involves John Lawrence the silversmith. And so those are two things that from newspapers, right, that I've been able to kind of piece together. I feel like the idea that John Lawrence the silversmith is the only Lawrence surnamed silversmith in the community at that time, probably, I mean, if the silversmith bit of the oral family history is true, then that all kind of falls together. And so I've admittedly been working with that confirmation bias that I have and saying that probably is my, whatever, fifth great grandfather, whatever, fourth great something. And I've been kind of basing most of my theories off of that work. So, in 5 years, I may find out that I'm completely wrong, right? But so far, that's definitely been, yeah, so far that's definitely been kind of my one kind of leading theory through all of this. Miko, of course, Miko had to comment, right? For those of you who know him, some of my family are in Smethwick at this point. At this rate, we'll end up turning Findmypast into a family business, and we just might, right? We talked about that last week. We may find that we're related somehow. Maybe we need a surname poll, list all the names and then list areas with biggest names selected. Oh, that would be interesting, William. I kind of like that in response to Miko, but Also not a bad idea for the Find My Past forum, right? That would be kind of fun to do. All right, so let me stop sharing this now and just go back to me, because I feel like you guys have been staring at this chart for a long time. So I think with the, what do we have left? Just a few minutes. Let's go back through just some basics, right? Like I feel like the power of crowdsourcing a genealogy problem is substantial. And I think that as a community, we've actually just started to kind of breach that possible ocean of opportunity. I feel like there's so much more that we can learn from each other. And this hour has just been a great example of that, right? You guys have shared books and links and online resources. You've been talking to each other and you've been correcting my pronunciation, which I know I've been kind of joking about it, but I actually do genuinely appreciate. And it just proves that the strength of the genealogy community just around the globe is phenomenal, right? There's so much to learn from each other. And I guess I would say again, I can continue to say, there's so much that we can learn from each other. No one knows everything. There's certainly people who are experts in, I don't know, military history in the UK versus the United States Civil War, right? But when we stop and compare notes with each other, we become so much smarter and so much better as researchers. There's so much opportunity. I send emails almost every week to people I know saying, does this make sense to you, right? I have a theory about this particular person in this scenario. What do you think about that? And the opportunity to learn and grow as a genealogist is just phenomenal, right? Whether we do it via email or Facebook or Twitter or Zoom call or whatever, right? So we would absolutely encourage you to use the forum as a place to build those relationships so that you can actually start to dig deeper, right? Instead of just, basic surface questions, right? Let's get into some really hefty, detailed conversations. I think everybody would love to see that. Oh, I did the pronunciation wrong. I knew it. That's probably one of the ones that Miko said you should probably never say out loud. All right, so that was Heather's comment. Thank you, Heather. All right, so this has been good fun, and I think Ellie is right, and she's responding to Miko's comment about we could be related, but the answer is always going to watch this space, right? There's always more to learn. There's always more research to do. And even in an environment like we're in today, when all we have available to us is online resources, there is still so much opportunity if we work with each other, right? If we work with each other to solve our problems, but also to learn about what we're going to do when lockdown is lifted. And we could go back into the archives again, and we can go back into, traditional research in a library or a facility and handle all those wonderful old documents and books that we all love to do. So really, really definitely take advantage of this time. A couple last comments. Deborah says there's some basic info about the British military presence in India at a website, and she posted the link. So that would be a great place for anybody to start, including me. Seems like it was the East India Company troops had the main presence on behalf of Britain in the period I'm looking at. So that's helpful. I'm also I'm reading a book about the American Revolution, to be honest, from the perspective of the British side of that conflict. And it starts with a history of the British East India Company, because they had a lot to do with the buildup of the economic situation in Britain before the American Revolution, which of course is one of the reasons why there were so many taxes, right? So, and that's one of the things that the colonists didn't like. So that's all kind of winding itself together, and that's a story for another day probably, but all still very interesting history. I think I love kind of digging into that. Okay, so I'm going to scroll through one more time. Oh, the patent. Patricia says the patent regarding the saddle is her hometown, and they're known for making saddles. It's only about 12 miles away. Really? Oh, that's fantastic, Patricia. That's really cool. I found the patent last year, and a colleague was able to have a researcher go in on site and pull a copy of it for me, and I just thought, the patents in the United States are almost all black and white. And so getting a color copy of that drawing was really, really neat. So that's pretty cool. I wonder if, and it always makes me wonder if he had done more patents, but so far I haven't found anything else. Gunsmiths in the same area, from that comment from Janet. Birmingham Archives has a lot of that. And I think, I think that's yet to be determined, right? Because if the John Lawrence that I have identified really is his father and he's that silversmith, then there's a whole wealth of research I could probably do just about his business and his industry and like what did he make and did any of it survive? Oh my gosh, I have to admit I search eBay all the time, and I haven't yet found anything. Okay, so I'm just going to go back and see. There's a couple. Okay, a couple more links being posted. Thank you very much. And what, oh, and we are basically out of time. So really, really great hour. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, but let me know what you thought about this crowdsourcing concept that we tried to do today. Absolutely just an experiment. Hopefully it was enjoyable for you, and hopefully more than I learned something, right? I really hope that lots of people learned from each other as we went through the last hour together. If this is something that interests you, again, we would love to see this kind of topic come up on the forum page. And I would say even build a couple slides on Google Docs and share the link. Let people go in and dig around and learn, right? And share your story. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, but leave comments. Let us know if you think you like this format, and we'll, potentially think about changing or maybe not doing it again or whatever. So whatever you think would work for you. In the meantime, it's been a fun hour, and I appreciate your help and I appreciate your guidance, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to kind of throw my story out there. It's always fun to share the family story. I hope you all take care of yourselves, take care of each other, be safe out there, and enjoy your family history. And we will see you again very soon. I don't have the schedule in front of me, so I don't know what's coming next week. Sorry, Ellie. But the schedule is always posted on our Facebook page for Findmypast. So take a look at this week's schedule and watch every Monday for the schedule for sessions for the week. So we're looking forward to talking with all of you again, and thank you for being part of our community. Have a great day.